and welcome to the Hallelujah podcast. I'm your host, Grace, and I'm beyond excited to have you here today. At Hallelujah, my mission is to provide a space where you can grow in your faith, be encouraged, and gain an understanding of God's word. We are now 3 episodes into our Christian dating series, and today we're going to be talking about the topic of long distance dating as a Christian pre-marriage. Now, I personally have never been in a long distance relationship unless you count like 30 minutes away. So, what we're doing today is welcoming on another Grace to the podcast. We have the beautiful Grace Tran, who is coming today just to share her testimony. And then we're also going to go through some tips or advice for dating as a Christian long distance. So, welcome to the podcast, Grace.
Thank you, Grace. This is going to be very confusing to people who are just
Yeah.
listening, but
Exactly.
hopefully,
We'll go Grace B and Grace T. Maybe you can tell by our different accents as well. So,
yes, yes.
anyway, well, love for you, first of all, just to give a bit of an introduction to who you are, where you're from.
Sure, yeah. Yes, my name is Grace Tran, not to be confused with this other lovely Grace, and I am from the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where I grew up. Obviously, you can tell the Californian accent in me. And I basically grew up here most of my life, except for, ironically, a short stint in Australia. That was like the only real place I lived, like more than a few months outside of this area, and I loved it. So secretly, I'm hoping the Lord will lead me back there someday, but it's up to him. But yeah, I was actually single most of my life. I had never really gone into like an official relationship. I had a lot of hesitancies and fears around dating and relationships and intimacy, not just like physically, but emotionally with
Yeah.
people in general. So like fast forward, I've been married now almost 3 years to a
Mm.
wonderful godly husband that I'm so thankful for every day. And I'll get into that more. But it's funny because I actually met him while I was living in Australia, but we met long distance and then we dated long distance. And I just
Yeah.
never thought that would happen. So yeah, anyway, in terms of work, I am a full-time podcaster, content creator, and working on a coaching business with my husband. So it's kind of amazing. I mean, whoever is listening to this, I'm sure already has a heart for, serving God and following God with your life and hopefully with your future spouse. And I can just adamantly say and confirm like that is really the vision that I have believed in my whole life, and then now I actually get to experience that with my husband as full-time online entrepreneurs. So yeah, that's been really exciting and just kind of following where the Lord is leading.
Yeah, that's so cool and such an encouragement. And that's the same for me, as someone who is single, like my heart, my longing is to not only serve God, but to be able to do that alongside someone. Like
Yes.
that's the most exciting and beautiful and profound and at times scary thing. But that's why it's so important to be with someone, to be dating and married to someone who is equally yoked and equally running after God as you are. So yeah, I love that that's a part of your story. And my hope for myself, I mean, being in this space as well with podcasting, one day that I will also be able to do this alongside, do this alongside my husband, whether it's podcasting together, whether it's some other area, but serving God together. Yeah, such an encouragement and an honor to have as well. But so, can you tell me a little bit about how you met your now husband?
Yes. So I'll give a little bit more of the backstory because I think it will add to even more of like why this really was a miracle. Like literally only God could have made
Yeah.
this happen. So I had mentioned earlier, I had a lot of fear of intimacy, mostly
Yeah.
because my own parents had a very difficult marriage growing up. My mom was nominally Christian, I would say.
Mm.
My dad was not religious at all, did not believe in any God, and did not support us, going to church or doing any like Christian activity. It was mostly like, study, go to school, get a job, the what the world tells us to do. So I saw a lot of misalignment, just creating so much conflict and just chaos, honestly. It was very emotionally unbalanced, emotionally traumatizing in many ways too. I would say borderline emotional abuse as well in my family. So there was just like a lot that I think traumatized me and scared me to the point where when I thought about dating and relationships, even though I was like, oh yeah, that'd be so nice. Like, you watch movies and you watch Disney movies, you're like, oh, that'd be amazing. But when I found myself in situations with men, I found myself completely like paralyzed and frozen, just like complete friend zone, like complete blocking people out. Because I had just such deep-seated wounds and trust issues growing up. So, fast forward, I remember actually shortly before I had met my now husband, I was actually in this, I guess people would call a situationship, like I had this guy who was a friend, but then we would hang out one on one, and then I'm like, what is going on? It was like
Yeah.
very confusing. And I was very frustrated because I was like, and he was
Yeah.
a Christian. He was actually, like he was very from the outside, you would be like, oh, such a godly guy, blah blah blah.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
like there was just so much confusion in that situation, and I didn't know like was did he like me? Did he not?
Mhm.
And I felt a little bit just like being played with a little bit because like there were some times that and I think this is very common actually even
Yeah.
amongst Christians, like we don't know what's going on and we feel kind of toyed with. We're like this is
Yeah.
just very confusing. So I remember distinctly, very clear. I was at this church retreat, and during the worship set, they were playing that song "Reckless Love," and
And
the lyrics, it just talks about how God's love pursues you and kicks down the door to go after you, and He fights for you. He's not this like wishy-washy love, kind of
mm,
person. He's intentional, and not just intentional, but He will fight to pursue you. And so
yeah.
I remember just being so wrecked by that song. I wrote down in my journal that day, I remember being like, I want to wait for the man that God has for me that is going to pursue me the way that he
Wow.
would pursue me.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was the day I was like, okay, enough with this like situationship. I deserve better. Like I'm not just a regular, person to play games with, play
Yeah.
games with my heart. So I think fast forward a bit, maybe like a year or so, is about the time I went to Australia. And funny enough, my career mentor at the time, he was also a believer. I asked him, I was like, "Oh, I'm moving to Australia. Like God made a way to go. I'm really excited. What do you advise me to do?" Thinking he would give me career advice,
Yeah.
But he ironically was like, well, Grace, you've talked about how your long-term vision is to have a family and to like have a
Mm,
godly children, godly family. And I wonder if you could even use this opportunity to really ask God about your future spouse.
mm,
And I was like, this is so weird. Aren't you a career guru? Like, why are you talking to me about
mm,
relationships right now? It also made me uncomfortable because, I'm kind of allergic to relationships. So, but he gave me advice, which was, because he actually met his wife also abroad. So he was like, you just never know what will happen.
yeah.
God could or he could not, but it wouldn't hurt to just make a list, like prayerfully asking God, like, what are the qualities or traits to be looking for in a spouse?
Mm,
And, I think a lot of us women, we have ideas of things we're looking for, but it really helped me so much. On the plane right over, I wrote down and it helped clarify to me, oh, this is what I value and this is why.
yeah.
And it just made it so much more just yeah, just clear so that I knew, okay, if I meet someone like this, like I'm gonna pay attention. But if I see other things that don't match this,
Mm,
then I'm not gonna waste my time, trying to
mm,
entertain a
yeah.
relationship
Yeah.
with that kind of person. So I think it was a few months after that that I actually was in a spot where it's funny because I think God used actually loneliness in Australia because
Mm,
I went there without knowing anybody.
mm,
So I felt really lonely for many months, and I was just like, God, didn't you send me here? And I was praying about a spouse, and like nothing's happening, and I don't have friends, I don't have dating prospects, I don't have anybody, and I was just at a really low point. But it was through that actually that God used to draw me to Him in a way that I had never experienced before, because before in California, I would just rely on people around me or distractions or community
Mm.
even, which are all the good things. But it was in Australia that I had to go to God. There was nothing else to run to. So out of that place, I was so happy and content being single. I was just like,
Yeah.
I am free as a bird. I can do anything. I can
Yeah.
fly to Perth next week, no problem. I can fly
Yeah.
to, I can do whatever I want, and not have a care in the world.
Yeah.
And then ironically, literally at that same time, that's when I met my husband. So I randomly joined this like Facebook group. It's like an online community for people who watch a YouTube channel, not even a Christian YouTube channel. It was just like inspirational videos. And
Mm.
I saw on their Instagram story, they're like, oh, we have the Facebook group, blah, blah. I'm like, why not? Just check it out, you know? And so I made every new member. This is the power of online communities for anyone who is in
Mm.
one. I made an intro post about myself, and it was on that intro post that my husband commented.
Oh.
And yeah, I was like, oh, he's Christian. And I kind of like looked at his page, but I was like, oh, he's all the way on the other side of the world in California, Southern California. I
Yeah.
was like, I would never, I'm bad at keeping up with friends. I would never be able to do a long distance
Mm.
relationship anyway. And so I was like, this is gonna not work out. But then fast forward, he actually messages me, slides into DMs, messages me, and we end up talking for like 4 months online on video, on voice memo. And then 4 months later, he flies over to Australia to come
Whoa.
meet me in person.
Wow.
And I remember when he told me when he bought the tickets and he was coming, I was like, whoa, like this is the reckless love that I think God is talking to me about.
Wow.
That I was just like so honored and so grateful. And
Wow.
then yeah, we made it official when he came and met me. And then we dated, I think about half a year long distance while we were praying for God to just lead us to close that gap because we didn't want to be long distance
Mm.
indefinitely. And then yeah, God led us both back here actually to the Bay Area where I'm originally from. And then we got engaged in 2020 and married at the end of 2020 in the middle of the lockdown,
Yeah. Oh, dear.
which was such a interesting journey, but
I
I
bet.
wouldn't have it any other way. God knew exactly what we needed to make all that happen. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so cool. I love the stories like this. And I think sometimes we can have it, exactly in our head about how it should happen. And it's going to be at church one day, and I'm just going to walk in and they'll be right there. But I love that God can use so many different things. And it really just, it brings you into just such a position of awe and reverence for who he is. Because it's like, wow, God, you know me, you know them, even though we're across the other side of the world, you can bring us together, you make the right things happen. And he really does pave the way for it, which is so beautiful. So I love that you have a story like that, because I think it gives people so much hope that it's not us controlling it. The pressure isn't on us. Do we sit at home in our room all day, every day, and never go outside? No, but we can also just rest and trust in God that He will bring the right person at the right time. So yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And what did you
Yeah.
find? So when you guys were in that period of long distance dating, how did
Mhm.
you how did you navigate it? Obviously, it was completely different sides of the world. So with the time zones, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, it was challenging in many ways, but also really good in many ways too. So I would say like definitely the time zones is a huge like California and Sydney are like literally opposite. I think the time difference it was like day and night, like
Yeah,
literally.
yeah, yeah.
So I remember because I'm not a morning person and I remember being so amazed that my husband he would wake up I think 6 a.m. To
Mm.
talk to me right before he goes to work. And, it was like we had a very short time window when we overlapped that we were both available.
Mhm.
Other times, we would just like go back and forth on voice memo. And so, yeah, it was a lot of just like figuring out like rhythms. Like initially, it was also like I didn't even know before he flew over or expressed his feelings for me. I was like, is he just like being nice?
Mm.
I wasn't really sure what to do about this. But I remember after it became official, we were like, okay, like what are we gonna do to like actually make this work? And I realized
Mm.
from that experience is like when you find like a reason, like a strong enough reason or a why, like you will make it happen. Because I always
Yeah.
felt like I'm too busy to like, accommodate my life for somebody and why would I change my schedule or make these accommodations? But after I met him and I realized I think this is really worth committing to and investing in, it honestly became easy, like adjusting things around it. Like I really looked forward to doing that. And I think the other thing that was honestly really challenging too was just balancing that tension of patience and waiting.
Mhm.
Like even though I think people often think like waiting in terms of like singleness, but like long distance is also waiting
Yeah.
where you're like, I want to be with this person in person, not just remotely and virtually. So I was
Mm.
really frustrated because I was like, God, I just want to drop. I literally just want to drop everything and like move to where he is or have
Yeah.
him move where I am. Like, but I really like felt so strongly that was just me taking control of things and me wanting to rush things that needed to take time and needed
Mhm.
God to open up doors that were meant to be. So, actually, what really helped was reading this book called Experiencing God by Henry Blackaby, and I read it with my now husband. We read it individually and then would discuss it together on video.
Mhm.
And it's about how to know God's will, how to know God's will and follow His leading.
Mm.
And through the book, one of the revelations I personally had from God was wait on me because I want to show you like what I can do apart from your strength. And
Mhm.
I think that's the most important part is to really just discern what you feel like God is leading you to do. Because for some people in certain situations, God is saying, yes, do this, or, take that leap of faith, take that step. But other situations, He's actually telling you to wait and to trust and be still, right?
Yeah.
So, in that situation specifically, I felt very strongly, I have to wait, but I don't want to wait, but I know He's telling me to do it, and I didn't really know what was going to happen. But yeah, amazing thing was like one part of it was that my husband at the time was in a job that was really toxic, and so I think he was just telling a friend about that situation, and that friend was like, oh, if you're looking for another opportunity, I know somebody at this other company in the Bay Area, blah blah blah. And so like through word of mouth, like the
Yeah.
company never even looked at his resume. He actually ended up getting an interview and then getting past all the rounds of interviews, and they never even he never applied to the job,
Wow.
but ended up getting into, and this was like the company that was like the industry leader of his industry. So the fact that he got that job without applying, without even looking for it, and it was in the Bay Area where I'm from, I was just like, that is really weird. And then for me, during that same time, I also was in a very difficult situation in my work too. So I was just like lightly applying to different things, just seeing where God would open doors. And a
Mhm.
lot of doors shut. Like a lot of the ones that I considered or applied to, they just all shut. But then one of them actually, I was like, okay, I think out of all of these, this one makes the most sense for me. And it actually, the door opened for me to go there, and it was in the Bay Area.
Wow.
So yeah, so I guess it's like a dance of like you
Mm.
wait on the Lord, but you also can do things too. Like you don't necessarily have to just like wait and do absolutely nothing. Sometimes He
Mm.
wants you to do that, but I think for me it was more just an encouragement from the Lord. Like I'm
Mm.
going to open the door that's meant to be open, so don't be anxious about forcing the door open on your
Mm.
own strength.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's those things, it's like you see only God in those stories, right? Only God can open those doors and teach you and guide you. And it's such a beautiful process and humbling to
Yeah.
surrender that. And just like you said, that
Yes.
control over to Him. And it
Mm.
reminds me of actually my other friend, also called Grace. Shout out to Grace if she's listening. She was also dating long distance. So her now fiance Jeremiah was over in the US. So for them in the natural, it made no sense, right? She's in Australia, he's in the US, very similar to you guys, but God makes a way, and it's that season of waiting, of praying, of fasting, and seeking God's will in those situations that He always comes through. And then
Yeah.
even just in that stage or that phase of long distance dating, the intentionality that it takes to get
Yes.
up earlier in the morning, catch them for that half an hour where time zones overlap. And
Yes.
I think you're exactly right that when when God is in something and you want something, you'll make a way for it,
Right,
even though it
right.
sounds crazy and like you would never want to do it. He makes a way, and when it's his will, there's so much joy in following that, even when it doesn't make sense sometimes. So yeah, I love that the
Yeah.
story that you guys have. And so if we go, so you got that new job, he got that new job, you're back over in the Bay. What did it look like when you then transitioned from long distance dating to dating in person? How long was that, and how did that change?
Yeah, that was interesting for sure. Well, I think connected with that, I did forget to mention earlier, but you touched on it, was the benefit of those challenges was that it made us so intentional and
Mm,
so good. Not good, I wouldn't say like experts, but we were a lot more refined in our communication, right? Because when you're long distance, there's a lot of things that get missed or misinterpreted over text. Like
mhm,
sometimes you're like, oh, are they upset at me? Like, why are they not responding? And then it turns out, they're just busy, but maybe they are
yeah.
upset. There's so many questions. And I remember because I had learned my whole life to kind of read between the lines when people, text a certain way or don't respond a certain way. So I remember a lot of anxiety rising up in me when we were long distance of like, is this gonna work? Like maybe it's too good to be true. I shouldn't have got my hopes up. I had a lot of like ups and downs mentally, but what was amazing was because of those things coming up, we got to talk about it and be really transparent. That was like our policy, we said, is just being honest and open and transparent about our real concerns, our real worries and fears, and oh, like, are you mad at me? Like not being afraid to ask the questions that oftentimes just get pushed under the rug,
Mhm.
because there's no other way to deal with it. That's the only method you can rely on for your relationship, is the communication. You can't, do anything physically. You can't like distract yourself by watching a movie together. Like, you have to talk. So we got to know each other a lot, like really deeply, and really just hashing all those like emotional and relational tensions out that I think a lot of people, it would have taken more years, I think, in a regular short distance relationship to figure out.
Yeah.
So then when we actually closed the gap and we were in the same area, yeah, I quickly like found, I think the really good part was that we were on the same page in a lot of things because we had already
Mhm.
talked about all of it, worked all of it out. We knew each other very deeply. I felt like I knew this person like my whole life. Like, it didn't feel like being with a stranger or being with someone I
Mhm.
had just met like less than a year ago. I was like, I really feel so much like I know you. I've known you my whole life,
Mhm.
because of all the communication and the time spent. What was
Mhm.
really challenging, I would say, was mostly adjusting. Oh, and the other part was, and we still see this even in our marriage, was it's so easy to be intentional because we had to do that. We established that muscle
Mhm.
being long distance. So even now in marriage, like, we make our date nights every Friday, non-negotiable,
Yeah.
and we love it. And it's like really easy for us because that's what we did and had to do when we were long distance in order to spend quality time with each other.
Yeah.
But I would say like the hard part, honestly, was dealing with other people's dynamics with me now that I was in a relationship, because
Mhm.
like everybody I had known, like my friends, my family, the people I grew up with in this area, they all interacted and saw me a certain way because I was single. I could, do whatever my parents wanted, or if my friends invited me to things, I'm like, yeah, no problem, I'll be there. And but now that I was in a relationship, and I honestly was still adjusting myself to what does it mean to be in a relationship.
Yeah.
I found, and I historically struggle with like people pleasing. So it was really hard for me to be like, how do I still be there for my friends and family, but also, of course, like tend to my new relationship, but also take care of myself in order to show
Yeah.
up well for people. So that was really challenging, I would say, for me. And I had to learn through that process. I just really had to start learning that sometimes you just have to disappoint people. Like, people are not
Yeah.
going to understand, like, oh, today's my date night with my significant other, so I'm sorry, I can't go to that party, or I can't go to that event. Or, another example is my parents really wanting me to do certain things with the family, but I'm like, oh, but we have commitments with his side of the family, and so like dealing with all those clashes, inevitably, like, people were not used to that. So
Yeah.
I think for me, it just really grew my muscle of like, okay, I'm not going to live by people's approval. At the end of the day, like, I'm just doing what I believe like I need to do, and that what God is calling me to do and
Mm,
prioritize in this season. And I just have to be okay with letting people down if that's what is going to happen. So
mm.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's good. I can definitely relate to that too on so many fronts. Even like for me at the moment, when you are single, you can do what you want when you want with whoever you want. You can go to different church events, you can catch up with different
Yeah.
friends, you can just move so quickly and shift based on what the need is at that point in time, which is a real blessing. And
Yeah.
I love it. I love this. I mean, the season was a little longer than what I thought it might be. Um, but there is so much freedom that you can have, and I love that you can, if you are single, you can just make the most of that time that you have to be able to do things with friends, do stuff with your family, serve more at church, and really just use that time instead of waiting and being so desperate for the next season. Just see where God has you right now and make the most of
Right.
that and enjoy it as well. But then yeah, I
Yes.
can definitely relate even to the people pleasing side of things. I used to be, yeah, shocking at that as well. And thankfully it's been a big thing that God has really refined me, and like setting those boundaries with people for not
Mhm.
only
Yeah.
your own time to rest and recharge, but also even just keeping that time and that Sabbath with God as well. It's so easy to go to all these things that are good. They're good for church. It's worship nights, or it's prayer, or it's Bible studies, but it can so easily take away from, like you said, what God is calling us to right now.
Right.
So yeah, I love that's a big thing that you guys navigated together, and even just
Mm-hmm.
the pursuit as well that your husband made as well. That's it. You're right. It's so much like how Christ pursues us, and God pursues the church as well. And I think you're right. It is something really important that we can look out for, especially as women, to be pursued, not to flip it the way that the world does, where you pursue them and you're running after them and it's all that control, but really just humbling yourself and pressing in and enjoying the way that I think God has really designed it to be as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we try to um like rush, or we even, I think most of our lives, I feel like as human beings, we're trying to control things.
Totally.
And it's just like a lifelong journey of learning to daily surrender and daily
Yeah.
trust God's timing and God's ways, and that what he says in his word is true. And I think a huge piece of this, I forgot to mention earlier, was, before I had met him, I was really inspired by seeing other Christian couples and Christian families that were like
Mm,
so, on fire for God. They got to serve God together. And before meeting people like that, I honestly was like, yeah, I just need a good guy. Like, I don't really care if he's Christian. Like, I just wanted someone who, could pass by as like, oh, maybe if he goes to church, like, that's fine. But I was so inspired, and my eyes were opened by seeing the vision of these relationships, that I was like, that's my dream for my future family.
mm,
That's when it became more solidified in me. I'm not going to compromise. I want someone who, like, we can carry the yoke together and not be
yeah.
unequal. We can pursue God, run after him together. And just like that image,
Yeah.
of like, you're running the race, and you're just running the race towards Jesus, and then you find people
Someone
who
who's
are
also,
running the same
yeah.
way alongside you. You're not running to find, oh, where's my spouse, where's my husband? You're like running towards Jesus. And
Yeah.
if you guys are both running towards Jesus, that's like the
Yeah.
best way for you to find that person. So I
Yeah.
think a lot of times, um for me personally, I was kind of worried, like, oh, am I not trying hard enough to like find a person? Because,
Yeah.
people are like, oh, go on all the dating apps, blah, blah, blah. And I
Yeah.
honestly did try a few of the
Yeah.
dating apps, but I was just like, I feel personally, for me personally, I was like, I feel so weird like doing this. I don't want to
Mm.
be swiping on people. And I don't know, it just
Yeah.
felt this like weird
Yeah.
ickiness. Other people, it works great for them, but personally, I felt convicted that God was
Yeah.
saying, here you are trying to like control things again. So, yeah, I gave up on the dating apps and I was just like, I'm just gonna pursue everything that
Mhm.
God has for me.
Yeah,
Like,
that's
what is
good.
He calling me into? And I'm gonna pursue that and just trust that as I run, I'm going to find that running partner and run together, be able to run together.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely my encouragement as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Such a beautiful story. And I was a similar. I had friends, probably like 2 years ago now. They're like, let's, we were all single at the time. They go, let's go on online dating. And I was like, oh, I really, really didn't want to. I know it worked for some people. I really didn't want that to be my story. So I very
Yeah.
reluctantly did it. And, it was lovely for a while. I met some lovely Christian guys, still friends with a few of them. But I had that same, I felt convicted about it. I felt like I was taking it into my own hands. And I just didn't like the feeling of, looking through all these different people and, oh, you don't like this, you don't like that. You kind of swipe and it's like, each of these people are God's creation. And for me, I totally wanted and had to let go of that and just trust that He will bring the right person at the
Right.
right time. It was such a distraction for me as well. You
Same.
find yourself all the time just messaging all these different people the same thing.
Right.
And yeah, it was never it. And it was never God's timing. So I've loved that part of my story that sure I did it. I put myself out there, but then it was like, you know what? God has the person for you
Right.
when you seek Him, when you pursue Him, when you run after Him, someone will come straight alongside that. And you're right, you're not looking around and going, oh, where is he? I'm gonna go to all these different churches and events
Right.
looking for someone. It's like just pursue God first, and
Yeah.
then He will bring the right person, and it'll be like, oh yeah, sweet,
Yeah.
this is great.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
it's actually, I feel like that feeling of like, because I've been guilty of that before as well. Like, oh, maybe if I go to this church event, I'll meet them, or maybe
yeah.
I'll,
You get
and it's
disappointed every
almost
time.
that, yes. And it's like, I feel like what I would have told my past self, like, if you catch yourself having those thoughts all the time, like, it's okay once in a while, but like all the time, and you're like, ooh, am I gonna meet, blah, blah, blah. And
Mm,
that's like borderline, like it's too obsessing, fixated on like trying to find a
mm,
spouse. I feel like God in the Bible doesn't even talk that much about like how to find a spouse. It's all about how to pursue God and how to love Him, how to serve Him and glorify Him and honor Him. And that really, at the end of the day, that's the most important thing. And yeah, I actually, my personal belief is like if we're so obsessed with finding that person, actually, like God being a good father, it's even less likely like He's gonna give you a spouse because you're going to like choke that relationship. You're gonna idolize it or
mm,
idolize that person in a way that they can't fulfill your needs. And yeah, I definitely think, at least for both me and my now husband, there was a reason why God's timing was that both of us had to get to a place where we were so happy being single and content. I literally told God, like literally, but right before I met my husband, I was like, I actually am so fine being single. I would rather be single the rest of my life and serve you than
yeah.
be in a relationship with someone that is not from you, you know? And so, yeah, ironically, like that's when I met him, and then I was like, oh dang, now I'm not as I'm not as free and single anymore, but
Yeah.
yeah, I learned, I think I learned a lot about how to sacrifice and like make compromise, not compromises, but like now considering another person. It was a continual refinement. So there's like a refinement in the season of singleness, of like learning to let go of the idols of a relationship. But then
Mm,
when you're dating and in a relationship, now is the refining of letting go of controlling the other person and controlling, how
mm,
the relationship is going, or even the timing of you guys closing the gap, like everything. And then honestly, now that we're married, the refinement is still continuing in terms of, where's God leading us ahead in our marriage and making decisions together and planning for the future. There's so much, and it really is a lifelong journey of releasing control in different ways.
Mm.
So,
Yeah, that's so cool. Maybe that'll make for a fun part two. You can tell me that initial bit going from the long distance dating, the dating as a Christian into that like first year or two of marriage, how you navigate that, how you set that up. Because I imagine it is
yeah,
a big change of life as well. But
yeah.
to wrap up this episode, do you have like a top couple of tips or bits of advice for people who are either in long distance relationships right now, or maybe that is what they will go into soon?
Yeah, I would say first of all, if you have been thinking, I would never get into a long distance relationship, I was there before too, and I'll just say never. Um, I think it's easy for us to like box God in and be like, oh, I like need to meet someone in person in order for it to work out. But you really, the only factor to something working out is God. So if you meet someone online, if you meet someone like at the airport and you guys fly to different countries, then nothing is impossible for God. So just,
Mhm.
I would say be open to how God is working in your life, but also don't make that like an obsession as much as possible. Try not to be so fixated on that because I really believe like God's desire and his heart for his children, for all of us, is just knowing him, like chasing and pursuing him. And then he's a good father. He's going to give us good gifts in the right
Yeah.
time, in the right ways, and we don't need to worry about that. The world tells us we need to control our destiny, but God tells us he's in control and he's planning he's already ahead of us. We don't have to worry about everything. So and at the core of that, I think even more importantly is like knowing your worth, apart from anybody else, apart from your relationship
Mm.
status, apart from what people say or think about you, apart from what you look like. Like oftentimes, on Instagram, people are like, "Oh, it's like such a thirst trap," like you're
Mm.
posting pictures of yourself, like, "Ooh, look at me!" Like, hope this makes me more like dateable or whatever. But I would say like, just like in Proverbs, it's not about you want a man who will go after your heart and not your
Yeah.
body, not your looks. It's not bad to look beautiful and whatnot, but I think the problem is when you are relying on that as your validation
Mhm.
and as your source of your worth, whether it's your looks or whether it's people's perceptions of you or your job or anything outside of God is not going to fulfill you, and so you're always going to be um,
Yeah.
looking for validation in all the wrong places, which ends up into these toxic relationships and spirals. So,
Mm.
yeah, I'm really grateful. I feel like God, in my own journey, had to take me through a lot of things to really teach me about really grounding myself in Him and
Yeah.
having an intimate, loving relationship with God. And I'm so grateful
Yeah.
that happened before I met my husband. Otherwise, I actually don't think I don't know if it would have worked out if I hadn't gone through all of those things before.
Mm.
And yeah, in terms of if you're in a long distance relationship now, I would say just hang in there and keep praying and keep trusting that God is going to make a way. And really honestly just discern, like, is God telling you to wait on him opening the doors to close the gap, or is he actually inviting you to take a step of faith and make a move and do something, right? Because
Mm.
it's not one size fits all. Like God told Abraham to leave his home, but then he told Abraham's I forget which one of his sons, he told him to stay. So it's like it's not going to be the same for everyone. It's going to look different in every
Mm.
season. The most important thing is really honestly thinking and asking God, like, what are you saying to me right now? And as much as you're able to, like, the best of your ability, just act by faith to do it and trust that his grace is going to be enough.
Yeah.
Ironic because there's a lot of grace in this
Yeah. There's
episode,
a,
but
a lot,
um,
a lot of grace, and my
there's
grace cup as well.
yes, there's more than enough grace,
Yeah.
literally and figuratively. And I think,
Yeah.
yeah, it's just beautiful when you realize that.
Yeah.
But you can't experience that until you actually give God the chance to
Mm.
show you that by taking those steps of faith. So,
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good and so encouraging as well. I know I was similar that in all my life I thought I would never do long distance, but then the more that I've thought about it, there are so many beautiful aspects that you really have to chase, like that intentionality, like that difference, like God just preparing you to wait and be patient and not to take that control that sometimes in my head I'm like, oh, maybe now that I've got my head around it, that'll be my story. Anyway, so all in his hands, God willing. But yeah, I love that it is your testimony and what God has brought you through, you can now share with other people and encourage them. And I'm personally encouraged. I know there are so many other people who will be encouraged to, not just by this episode, but by your podcast, by your coaching, even just those day to day conversations that we can have with people to go, hey, here's my story. Can I, speak into your life or your relationship? Can I encourage you in this area? So yeah, I'm very, very thankful for you to come on in and share more about your story. It's been so much fun to get to hear about that too.
Of
And
course.
whenever I have a guest, I always love to ask them just to pray for anyone listening, whether they're in that long distance relationship at the moment, or maybe it's something coming up in their future. Are you happy to wrap us up in prayer for anyone listening?
Yes, I would love to.
Yeah.
Yes, Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity just to talk about trusting you, God, in every season, no matter our relationship status, no matter where we are or what we're going through. You're always constantly drawing us closer to you, God. You're always inviting us into deeper intimacy and trust and vulnerability. I just want to pray for that person, God. I just feel so strongly that there will be someone listening to this who like knows everything in their heads, but emotionally, like internally, they're still struggling to really trust you in this area of dating and relationships. And yeah, for that person, I just want to pray, Lord, that you help them to just come to you honestly, God. You are a God of compassion, not of shame, not of condemnation. And you welcome us just as we are. You say, you invite us to cast our cares upon you because you care for us, to cast our anxieties and our burdens and our worries and our questions, our doubts, even our accusations and anger, God. You actually are not even offended by that because like you want us to be honest. You want us to process with you and not have to clean our act up to be good Christians. And yeah, I just want to pray a freedom and just a breakthrough for whoever is listening, who might feel like they need to filter themselves and not be like this, oh, like unfaithful Christian, and just help them to pour out their heart honestly to you, God, because that really is what you want us to do as our Father. You draw us into that intimate and real relationship, that authentic relationship with you. So, yeah, Lord, whatever is hindering them from just pouring out their hearts, I just pray you would remove that, that you would just come so close to them and remind them, Lord, that you love them, you don't shame them, and you see their desires. You see the desires of their hearts. You've actually placed desires in their hearts too, so it's not to be ashamed of. And yeah, thank you that you are guiding them and strengthening them and refining them in this process too. I just pray, yeah, whoever is just wanting a godly relationship and godly family, I know that's also part of your heart too, Lord. So we just pray that you would help all of us really to continue balancing the tension between desire and surrender, to know that we can do both at the same time. We can bring our desires to you and then surrender them to you as well, to know that you will do as you know is best. And just because things don't happen according to our timeline, it doesn't mean we're not good enough or we're not Christian enough. It just means you have better things, God, that you know we need. So, yeah, I just thank you, Lord, for this opportunity to be reminded of all these things. And we just pray for more God-centered relationships and also rooted women of God who can root themselves in you, and out of that come an overflow to pour into their future relationships and families for generations to come, God. Would your glory be shown and magnified in Jesus' name? Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen. Well, tell us where people can find you if they're looking to listen to your podcast, find your content, your resources. Yeah, tell me where about people can find that.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, my husband Alex and I, we have a podcast called Let's Unpack That with Alex and Grace, where we talk about how to live out our faith in our everyday lives and talk about very nuanced topics, such as relationships, but also other things. We also are very active on social media. If you want to follow us on at sign with the trans, Trans, that's our last name. And the last thing is we also do one-on-one coaching. So, if anything, that you want to process and talk through. That's literally what fills us up and like gives us
Yeah.
so much joy, is to help people like process through like what are the internal barriers holding you back from really stepping into the freedom and wholeness and healing God has for you. So you can find out more about that on our website, on our social media as well.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I'll have that all of that in the description below as well. It's yeah, it's been such an encouragement having you on. You're such a beautiful woman of God, and I love that you are one of those people who are pursuing Christ, and your husband is doing that too. And we need more godly marriages who have Christ at the center and are both running after him, because unfortunately these days it's not that common. So good on you guys for doing what you're doing, and yeah, keep at it. So,
Thank you.
thank you everyone so much for tuning in to episode 53 of the Hallelujah podcast, How to Navigate Long Distance Dating with Grace Tran. My hope and prayer is that I'll always be able to point you to Jesus and that you'll leave feeling encouraged, equipped, inspired, and ready to go out and be salt and light in this world. I'll still have a few more episodes to come as a part of this dating series. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you follow the podcast so you don't miss any episodes, and also Grace Trans content as well. So I'll leave all of that below. God bless you all and see you in the next episode.